Real quick. All right, everybody, want to find a seat real quick? All right, we'll go ahead and get this one started with Mr. Wayne Kimmel of 76 Capital first. Wayne, take it away.
Thanks, Brian. And thanks, everybody, for coming out and hanging around. And Brian, great job on that last panel. Again, like legends of Vegas. I mean, you can't get any better than that. Once again, my name's Wayne Kimmel from 76 Capital. We're one of the venture capital investors in VSiN, and just thrilled to be here today. I want to again just echo Brian's thoughts, thanking my team here at 76 Capital. Jess, and she's done an amazing job with the rest of the team in really putting this on. Michelle and her team at VSiN have been amazing, and also Ken, thank you for all your support from Arizona State University's Global Sport Institute. And Jeff's here somewhere, so thank you to everybody. And it's really just been awesome to put this on. Just to kind of give you a quick background of who we are at 76 Capital, what we're all about. Our whole business is all about trying to find smart and nice entrepreneurs who want to do the next thing. People who are going to challenge the status quo. And that's what's so interesting about what's happening today. Yes, thank you. What's happening today within the sports betting industry, and I'm so excited about having this panel here today. I mean, what we're all about is this idea of thinking about like what's next. How can we really push the limits? You think about back in the days when guys, I see Patrick over there. I mean, I got guys who have been in the sort of back in the day when we're in the internet days back in the 90s, right? And you start thinking about all the incumbents that were out there and all those players, the GEs, the IBMs, the Microsofts that were going to win the internet. They should win it all. Well, here's the thing. What's happening today is we have those similar kind of incumbents in the sports betting industry. So we're looking and thinking about like where are the Amazons, where are the Facebooks, where are the Googles coming from? Where are the entrepreneurs who are doing the next thing in this space as this industry continues to grow? We just heard from, guys, we were just listening. I mean, we just listened to guys like Jimmy and Vinny, and talking about how big this market can be. It's really exciting. So at 76 Capital, we've kind of looked at it and thought about it from the perspective of what's going to happen with the data collection side of this industry, the data analytics side, the broadcasting side, the broadcasters themselves, the media side of things. How is all that going to play out? And my partners, John Powell and Ryan Howard and others that were a part of what we do at 76 Capital are thinking about that and investing in those spaces. And so at this point, I'd love to start, kind of tie in and introduce you to the panel that I have here. So sitting to my far right is Bobby from Swish Analytics. We have Ken from Arizona State and the Global Sport Institute. We have Davyeon from Shot Tracker, and Darren Rovell from the Action Network. And I'd like to just sort of start with Bobby. I mean, I think, Bobby, it'd be great to sort of tell your story of what you and the team have done at Swish, and why did you start this company, and what's so interesting about this whole sports betting industry to you?
Yeah, so my name is Bobby. I am one of the founders of Swish Analytics. We are a U.S. sports odds maker. We focus and have expertise primarily in player propositions, in-play, and bet request style odds making. So we primarily work with overseas regulated bookmakers to kind of proliferate new innovative betting products as it relates to U.S. sports. Got into the space about 5-6 years ago, just saw at that time, this was a little bit even pre-Daily Fantasy or right in the infancy of that, just a void of any kind of algorithmic or machine learning and data-driven content, tools, analytics as it related to sports betting and fantasy. It was mostly touts and kind of perspectives and written content at the time. So we launched Swish Analytics, a proper website, which is basically a Bloomberg terminal for sports bettors and fantasy players in the U.S. Help them make smarter decisions, aggregate all the data they need to feel more confident in the bets they're making. And over the past couple of years, we've really evolved into more of a B2B odds maker to provide the most innovative betting products, again, related to player props and what we call bet request products. So just for kind of context of what that is, We allow our sportsbook operators to offer their customers overseas and now moving into the US the ability to bet on any line for anything they want at any time. So if a customer says, I want to bet on LeBron James to score exactly 50 points tonight, and I want to bet on the Lakers to cover the spread, we can generate accurate pricing for that in real time. That's kind of moving away from the traditional pre-derived menu of things you can bet on, which we believe is going to be a huge part of the rollout in the US. So yeah, happy to be here.
Ken, I'd love for you to, Ken is now at Arizona State University running the Global Sport Institute, which is backed by Adidas. You're the distinguished professor, Adidas professor or something?
Adidas Distinguished Professor of Global Sport.
And you wear Adidas sneakers, right? You have to wear them, or is that part of the deal?
The price is right, so.
Well, and Ken is really the father of sports business education when I came up in 2000. So
Right, and I didn't know that, Darren. No, I'm kidding. No, I'm kidding. So Ken and I are both from Philly, right? So Ken was 30 years at Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania, as you said, Darren. I mean, he wrote the book on the sports business. So Ken, tell us a little bit about what's happening over at Arizona State right now. Where you guys think what's happening in the sports betting space?
Yeah, so short is the Global Sport Institute is focused on making sport better, the industry better, the people in it better, the entities better, and the world better as a result. And think about capturing the power of a whole university and research in every area. And so gaming falls squarely in there. And as we got started last year, this whole Supreme Court decision comes up. What's going to happen? What's next? So, we're really in the first grade, as I've told a lot of people, in terms of figuring out what's going on and where things are going to go. And we've done a lot of work in a lot of different areas, from concussions to diversity to wearables and all that sort of thing. So it's interesting that now, I was at this traditional business school, Wharton, for 30 years. This whole gaming space is finally one, as we were just talking about, that we see going from this kind of $5 billion, okay, it's an industry kind of space, to this mega industry where finally attention is going to have to be paid in a way that sport wasn't focused on at Wharton in the way that I think it could have been. But now with this piece in there, there's kind of all this scurrying around in a lot of places figuring out, how do we figure out what's going on? How do we look to the future? How do we provide better information, which the best academic institutions do, that the industry can actually utilize to make themselves better, as I said, and make the world better as a result.
And we'll get into a bunch of that stuff as part of this whole panel. So Davyeon, you and I see Bruce over here, you guys started Shot Tracker a couple years ago and put together a pretty amazing group of investors. We're proud to be part of that. And love to sort of hear what you were originally thinking with Shot Tracker, and now how things have progressed over time.
Yeah, so when we initially started Shot Tracker, I remember getting a call from Bruce, him sitting in the backyard tracking just shots with his son and saying, hey, how do we solve this? What were you doing when you played in college? And, good old faithful pen and paper. And we decided to get together and say, okay, we can build something to automate this data collection. After we went into the market, it was more of a Fitbit for basketball. So think about one individual tracking shot attempts, makes and misses in the backyard. After we went to the market, people really liked the product, they liked engaging, but people started to ask for more. They were starting to ask for, how do you track in a practice environment, multiple players, multiple goals, multiple balls. I mean, we have customers who have, 12 goals, 20 players, 20 basketballs all at the same time, right? And then, if we look to now, it's kind of transitioned to not just practice, but also games. How do I get the continuity of data from practice and games? So today, our solution is a sensor-based technology that requires 3 components: a player sensor, a Shot Tracker-enabled basketball. We have partnerships with Spalding Wilson, Nike, Under Armour, Adidas, Molten Baden, so pretty much every basketball in the market. And then we put sensors in the arena or the facility. We're able to track the location of player and ball within 2 to 5 centimeters, and within millisecond response times. One of the big things for us is the speed of the data, especially with stuff what my friends down here are doing with machine learning, et cetera. Getting access to that data is very powerful, and getting access to it within the right speed, the right time frame, is pretty game changing. So we're excited about what's happening in the market, and we continue to execute and just proliferate, to get in as many arenas as possible.
So Darren, I think a lot of us would have read and seen your shift from ESPN to now the Action Network. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what you guys are doing at the Action Network, but also personally, why did you make this shift and why now?
So I have the fortune of living in New Jersey. I don't know if that line has ever been uttered before. But the fact that I could see a mature market before my eyes when the rest of the country besides Nevada does not see that mature market is amazing. I mean, you just think of the guy at New Jersey Transit who was selling advertising, who was making cold calls for 7 years, and then all of a sudden FanDuel wants to buy the outside of the train, William Hill wants to buy the inside of the train, and Caesars wants to buy the ceiling. Or the guy at selling sponsorship for the Prudential Center, and by the time next season starts for the Devils, there might be 6 gambling partners in there. So to basically,
Scott will sell anything.
yeah, that's true. That's true. Just below Brett Yormark. So the fact that I could see this manifest itself, that my dad, who's not a gambler but a huge sports fan, was asking me, hey, what's the total on this game? And he was watching it from a gambling side. This was when I was still at ESPN. And my gambling stories, a number of my stories went from 20 to 40 to 80. After PASPA happened, for me, it was like, okay, I just got to find the right partner here. And looking around, I didn't want it to be someone connected to actually taking bets. I wanted straight up editorial. I wanted the best business of data, so not touts screaming at each other, but real data. And I wanted kind of the new age, guys who have come from outside the gambling world, who could be in anything, and were just good at what they did. And so my editor-in-chief at ESPN took the risk in October 2017, before PASPA, 8 months before, to go over to the Action Network. And I had kind of monitored what they had done, the Chernin Group investment. I looked at the tracking of bets. I looked at the high-end product, Bet Labs, where you could basically say if there's a 25-mile-per-hour wind, how many times has, basically write your own quant program and say how many times has when there's a 25-mile-per-hour wind, has the under hit, and then say what games this week have a 25-mile-per-hour wind. I mean, that's crazy shit. So looking in that and looking at kind of covering the business of gambling and the business of data and how big I thought that was, the Action Network was perfect. And then right before I moved, Patrick Keane, who's here in the audience, our CEO, came over, and that was the last step.
That's great. That's great. I mean, and kind of working off of that, Bobby, I mean, your business is all about machine learning, being able to take these different types of all this data that's out there today and present that in ways to the consumer, to the sports books themselves. Share with us sort of where it's all going from your perspective.
Yeah, so odds making is kind of the core backbone of a lot of these products that end up in front of the consumers. Clearly, there's a ton of different markets to bet on a daily basis for any consumer that opens any of the apps in Jersey through DraftKings or whoever it may be. Odds making over the course of the history of sports betting in Nevada and even overseas has been very manual. It's large trading teams sitting around trying to figure out exactly what certain spreads, totals, and different kind of prop lines should be. We've started to really dive into automating that process by building models off of historical and real-time data. What that does is, one, provides more accurate pricing overall, which means eventually here in the US we'll come to a mature state where I believe people will start to compete on price. So you're not just going to be downloading your favorite app, but figuring out, doing some price shopping as we all do in other sectors of our lives. But additionally, it allows you to start providing, kind of newer experiences that previously never existed. And so we're based in the Bay Area. Our company's based in San Francisco. We hire out of, Berkeley, Stanford, top PhD guys that happen to have a huge love for sports. And building kind of automated infrastructure that allows you to take whatever's happening on the field at any given point in time and turning that into a compelling, bettable market that is, risk averse and safe for the sports book, but also compelling for the customer. So, for example, I'll go back again, kind of bet request is what we call it. There's a number of different names in Europe in the industry. This started where you could start tweeting into sports books in Europe and saying, hey, I don't see this on your site, but I would love to bet on, we use the LeBron James to score exactly 42 points tonight because it's my 42nd birthday and I think I'm lucky. The sportsbook would tweet back at you and say, hey, wait an hour and go to this link and our guys will figure out what the right price is for that exact bet and we'll hang it out there and you can place a bet on it. We're looking to innovate that very quickly to automate that entire process, which we have. So now just on the sportsbook's website, you can go and you can play around with it yourself as a customer and build whatever bet you like. Again, still priced correctly so the sportsbook can make money in the long term, but really puts the control in the user's hands, which I think we can all agree in a mobile world, in a world where much younger audiences who grew up with technology, they want what they want when they want it and nothing else. And I think that's the point that we're kind of innovating towards. And machine learning, data science is very much at the core of allowing that to happen. Otherwise, it's very, very highly manual processes, massive overhead costs for the operators and things of that nature.
So just following up on that, just specifically, could you give us a real hardcore example of I don't know, Steph versus LeBron, points, rebounds, assists, that kind of a thing? Or
Yeah. We see a lot of popularity in our synthetic markets. By that I mean people will say, I want to bet on Steph over 5.5 3-pointers and Steph under 10.5 assists. And those markets are correlated. You need to take some kind of approach in understanding how to price that correctly. And so we spent a ton of time on figuring out how to, again, provide that in real time to the customer as quickly as possible. Points plus rebounds plus assists. We all know the popular markets. Let's say in my world, player props world, it's how many points is a guy going to score, how many rebounds, how many assists in an NBA match. But when you get to yes, no on a triple-double and things of that nature, it becomes a little bit more granular. And again, it kind of attracts different audiences that, and we'll probably get to this, but a lot of people in the U.S. grew up on fantasy. They understand how to place a bet or make a prediction on a player, and player-level betting and some of the more exotic odds making that other companies and Swish can do allow you to immediately turn that into a betting experience that someone understands. So they don't have to be educated about what is a money line, how do I read the board. It's, hey, I'm already betting on Tom Brady every weekend to throw over 300 passing yards. Just give me the odds and let me do it.
Thanks. So Ken, one of the things we were talking about earlier, and it's is the fact that we look out at this audience, we look out at sort of the panels that many of us sit on and things we talk about, and we look at the diversity issues around race and gender, et cetera. And I just wanted to read a quick quote, from SBJ's, Abe Madkour. He said something, just recently after he put out the sort of the 50 most influential people in sports, and his big thing was, trying to figure out, having more diverse people as part of that list. And his thing is finally we expect a number of complaints over the lack of ethnic and gender diversity on our most influential list. We agree and grow more and more frustrated every year, but we see this list as an accurate reflection of the sports business, and we pledge to continue to rethink influence in hopes that this list someday will be more inclusive in the future. And I think that's how we feel as well. That's one of the things that we talk about a lot, and I'd love to get your thoughts on how we're gonna how we'll do this.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I spent years talking to Abe about that. Think of the original list. Those of you who follow Sports Business Journal, or those that you followed, the Sports Illustrated would have a list of sporting news, and the only people of color that would be on those lists, if they were there, would be athletes. And just whatever you think about it, that's in America in 2018, 2019, kind of an interesting place to be. Why is that? And it has evolved more positively on these lists. It's still problematic. A lot of it is historic. If you think about Donald Sterling acquiring the San Diego Clippers for $13 million in the 80s, And I can tell you factually that there was bias against minority groups purchasing franchises at that time. So the time to get in, I mean, even I could get $13 million together. I mean, I could pull a room together and do that at that time. I'll tell you, I cannot now pull together $3 billion. So it's a very different setting. So as bias has declined, you can do the economics class, the value of these things and the way to enter these things has gotten more difficult. It is striking, though, in this space, but it's, and we've talked about doing some work in this, in sports tech in general. It's rare to see a person of color in sports tech overall. It's rare to see a person of color in technology. And don't forget the gender issue as well, and the various gender horror stories you hear about women and how many of them got to the top there and the kinds of things they had to encounter. So I always say, and do a lot of work in this space, that step one is to have a consciousness of it, that especially in a growing industry, to have a consciousness as you bring people on board, to have a consciousness as you contract with people. Are you taking that step to see if there is someone diverse, someone outside of your traditional network that might be able to be helpful? And in the end of the story, you kind of fast forward. Well, why would I do that? I mean, and I used to spend a lot of time when I first got to Wharton. Pitney Bowes came to Wharton and said, "We'll give you $250,000." This is the mid '80s. $250,000 to tell us how diversity impacts the bottom line, because that's the only way we'll deal with that issue, is if we can show there's some return on it. And I remember being rebellious and sort of saying, you should want to do it because it's the right thing to do. That it's a hearts and minds kind of issue. And I will tell you that as I've evolved over time, not only is there an answer to that, I've come to realize that in some ways it doesn't matter why somebody takes the step to be more diverse. But there's study after study that shows if you are trying to reach more diverse markets, if you're trying to grow your market share, the more diverse people you have in the room, the greater chance you have of accomplishing that. Now, it's interesting as I say that, though, but the other issue is in this whole, so in terms of making money in the space, in terms of being part of the business, I think that's imperative. In terms of people that participate and are gamers and losers in this, I think there's a whole different economic question that comes into play about who we have involved in participating in this if they don't have the right knowledge base. And if you look at, we take the worst form of betting, we think about, state lotteries and the like, and we think about the regressive impact of the poor people that are engaged in that. I think it's, part of the integrity, to use it a different way, of this industry, is to make sure that there's not, Joe Camel type engagement of people involved in gaming that should not be involved in it. And that ends up being a regressive impact largely on people of color.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, it's one of the things we were talking about just from a talent perspective, right? And how you train the next generation of talent and look and sort of put this industry out there. And let people know that there are opportunities. I mean, Brent talked about Phyllis George. I mean, that's just, the fact that, that was a big deal, right? I mean, it was a big deal to have her even on the NFL set. But moving forward, we've got to really think about that. And it's one of the things that we at 76 Capital talk to our companies and our CEOs about a lot, about these ideas, about how we move things forward. So, Davyeon, I'd love to go ahead.
Hey, wait, before you move on, I just want to make a couple quick points. I think that it's really important, so I'm a minority in tech, right? A dude who studied computer science and math and led his basketball team in scoring was, so.
Can I get a parlay on that?
Yeah, best of both worlds. But I think it's really important for people to understand that, for companies to be successful, especially in today's day and age, it's really important that your team is representative of the customer. And when your team is representative of the customer, you get this, diversity of thought, diversity of process, diversity of experience that I think is really, really important. And we're seeing it now, just looking at tech companies, that companies who have a diverse leadership team are able to address and interact and provide solutions to their customers in a much more compelling way to impact that bottom line. So that's the first point. And the second point is that I encourage people not to hit the easy button. I think it's really look, we're all whatever we're doing, right? You want the least path of resistance. And sometimes you just have to go that extra mile, because it's really easy to say, hey, I'm going to go with people in my network. Because I will tell you, there are people, there are computer science degrees who are minorities. There are people out there, but it's important for us to not necessarily just hit the easy button and go with what's close, what's easy. So those are, just 2 points to add to the discussion.
Absolutely. No, I appreciate that, and thanks for jumping in on that. And I'd love also to sort of have you sort of share what just happened with Shot Tracker, what you guys just did with ESPN, and the Hall of Fame Classic that you did, and sort of how you believe something like where, kind of talk about what that is, and then how that comes into the sports betting space.
Yeah, absolutely. So, one of the things that I think is important to note about us, right? Everybody talks about data, and the traditional sense of what we consider data today is just really statistical data, right? Whether it's the information in the box score. And I think one of the things that we bring is statistical data, but at a much granular level, right? So I like to talk a little bit about, we were talking about golf, but it's not just, hey, I made a par, but it's the details that go into making the par. Hey, it was this hole, and I hit it up 200 straight and 100 to the right, so I was out of bounds, and I was able to chip it in from 125 to get to a par. So it gives that much more context. And I think that's one of the things that we're bringing to the table, which I think is pretty powerful. If you ask anybody in machine learning, the more granular, the more data you get, the more powerful it gets. And I think that's a critical piece of being able to take tracking data and use that data, because it's going to tell you stuff that the box score, it's beyond the box score. It's going to tell you stuff that the box score is not going to give you. It's going to tell you, hey, when he goes right and on the third pass, and he goes by and this person is defending him, there is a very high probability that he's going to make that shot. So it's going to give you much more granular data. In regards to what we did with ESPN, we were fortunate to get an NCAA waiver to be able to put tech on the bench, and it was like the first collegiate game where all the players were using, all the players had sensors on, all the ball was a Shot Tracker enabled Wilson ball, and the arena was outfitted.
So what that means is Shot Tracker enabled ball. It's actually, you put a sensor.
Yeah, there was a sensor in the ball utilized in the game. And the data was used on the benches by all the coaches. And I will tell you, a Bleacher Report did an article that talked about the fact that one of the coaches was making decisions in the game that led him to win by 25 points. He was literally saying, when Bleacher Report asked him, he's like, look, I looked at the data in the first half, and I saw we had 19 possessions where we were shooting about 22%, and all those possessions, we were making less than 2 passes. And when I looked at the next 15 plus possessions, we were shooting much better percentage because we were making 3 to 5 possessions. So I started harping, and then we had people on the bench calling out the number of passes, and the team wouldn't even shoot until they got to, those 3 or 4 passes. So you had coaches making decisions in real time with data that you're not going to get in a box score. So when you think about that conceptually, you think about how powerful that can be in the future with the granular level of data. So I personally think it's going to change the game for everybody involved, right? For all constituents, whether it's coaches, players, whether it's market makers, whether it's we had ESPN using the tracking data to enhance the experience from a broadcast perspective. So I think it could really help from a fan perspective, where you talk about some of those unique bets, but imagine if you're getting that granular level of data, how that changes the things that you can bet on, the decisions that you make. So I think
one of the things that was crazy, right? We were standing next to each other and we saw the USC coaches turn down the 4-minute stat sheet that normally that's like gold, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And they're like, we don't need that because we have iPads, we have real-time data, we're good.
Yeah, and what they were seeing on the benches, they were seeing a box score, they were seeing shot charts that were breaking down, all happening in real time. With team versus player for both sides. They were seeing optimal lineups. So they were seeing every lineup that they were able to use in the game and how that lineup performed and being able to filter on that. And lastly, they were able to see advanced analytics, which gives them a breakdown between the half court versus transition, number of passes, paint touches, ball reversals. It was great for us. It was great for the evolution of the sport of basketball. I know we've been talking about where sports is going, and I think that was just another step. And I feel very privileged with our team to be able to be a critical piece in that evolution.
Yeah, so Darren, I think it's interesting. I mean, the comment was made, there were comments on the first panel that Brent talked about the deals, about the stats deals that the different casino companies have now, or betting companies have now done with the leagues. If it's a good idea, not a good idea, the real-time, the stats that they're getting. Davyeon's talking about a whole nother level of stats. And I know you've written about this and tweeted about this. What are your thoughts about those deals?
I think a lot of people in the industry are kind of mad at MGM for establishing the precedent that the leagues wanted. The delay is not so much that it compromises anything. There's not hundreds of examples of the delay meaning anything. And so the value of the data is what the leagues want, and MGM and eventually maybe Caesars has validated that the leagues think that the data is a billion-dollar plus business. And the question, in some states you see that the leagues have been pushing quietly behind the scenes to not only make the states do the integrity fees for them, but there's even legislation that they say that you can't be a licensed operator if you don't buy the data from the leagues. And I think that's pretty crazy. I think Brent made the right point there. I think there's also the data, showing data to the bettors, whether it's Shot Tracker or whatever. I think bettors continually want more and more data. I think even the least sophisticated gamblers, the people that the Action Network's going to be onboarding, people who say, I can't just make a bet anymore, I want to be the best at it. I think that's the part of data that's going to really work and be meaningful. Just like when I was at CNBC, the unsophisticated person who was investing in the market would want to watch CNBC even if they weren't making sophisticated investments, because there was an aspirational feeling to, I want to be the best. So I feel like the worthwhile data is the data from people like us to show you why your bet may or may not make sense, to take the emotional part out of betting if you really want to make money. Some people don't want to make money, they just want to bet on their teams. So that's kind of where I differentiate it, and I think it's going to be very interesting on the integrity fees as well.
But I've been wondering if that's going to change though. If that was really the league's kind of, we got to do something right away. Right. Is this
The leagues are still pushing for the data. I mean, the leagues are pushing stronger because they feel like MGM has affirmed that this is something that's worthwhile. I think the leagues are pushing behind the scenes more with the states to kind of build that in there. I mean, the federal bill, which I don't think has any chance, and I'm not breaking any news there, also has that they should use league data. So I think they've been emboldened, not pushed down by what's happened in the marketplace. And then the last thing is the integrity fee, which I think is probably the hairiest part of it. And that, and I've thrown out this scenario before, and I've thrown it in front of Jim Murin at MGM. So the MGM does a deal with the NBA, and they're the official betting sponsor of the NBA. It's sponsorship, it's not necessarily exclusive data, but I go to MGM because of that relationship. And then there's a game that's a pick'em game between the Raptors and the Nets, and there's a goaltend at the last minute, and I have a bet on the Knicks, and the Knicks goaltend, and they lose. And then the next day, Adam Silver comes out with his minutes and said, yeah, that goaltending wasn't the right call. All right. I went to MGM. I went to MGM because it was the official data of the NBA. Now, you're not going to change that goaltend. You're not going to change the result of the game. But this is called an integrity fee, people. Right? So if you have integrity, and yes, the Knicks lost the game, and that wasn't a goaltend, you said it was the wrong call. I want my money. Now, Jim Murin says to that, well, it's always been we go along with what the game said, and the game said that the Knicks lost. But If you're getting a fee and calling it an integrity fee, I want my money. That is going to be the most interesting thing as data is being paid, and if the integrity fee ever comes to fruition.
The other thing that I think is would be interesting is how, people use data to change the structure or the rules around the game. A perfect example of that is, we've been doing some stuff where, we call it the Reggie Miller rule. I mean, I think Reggie scored, 9 points in 13 seconds. Yeah. We call it the Reggie Miller rule because now as we sample our data at 120 times per second, imagine the ball going through the net and you're able to stop the clock, within that time frame versus waiting for the ref, the blow whistle, the human error involved. And that's happening in a close game how many times? So I think that there's also going to be the side of it where people are looking at the data and making rule changes that could definitely impact the game and impact people like you're stating.
Well, if the NFL is going to take an integrity fee, I want a electronic tracker inside the ball. I do not want them putting those chains out and make a call. I mean, they have to change it for me. It cannot be subjective. It cannot be subjective.
I would add just, I would agree in terms of the short-term grab around data, and that was kind of the first way the leagues have figured out how to monetize this industry. But I do know, we have a lot of league relationships, and these guys are working behind the scenes to figure out what the right compelling products will be for the customers. Obviously, that is going to drive more interest in betting, which will then drive more interest back into the actual viewership and engagement of the league overall. So I think it's probably a little short-term. Now, short-term might be the next couple of years as it rolls out, and you'll see data licensing and fees, and MGM's very much involved in that. But I would say we should give them a little more credit. I've seen a lot of interesting and innovative conversation around what will the products look like, how will they differ from what exists now, maybe globally or here in Nevada. Now the leagues, of course, need to keep and will keep that distance of being as not that close to the actual betting activity, but they obviously have a lot of experience building products around their sport, and I think you can meld that with the sports betting experience to build some cool stuff that will, again, benefit them in the long term overall more than anything.
I think it also, by the way, I think as you get into in-play, and we're going to have this Friday, NBC Sports Washington kind of do the first real sample the league has approved for 8 games of an alternate broadcast on the NBC Sports Washington app. I think as we get into in-play, and you meld the league's rights and the highlights and live with actual betting, I think again that the leagues are going to be as close as they have to be to sell what they. I don't think the leagues are going to be able to keep their distance.
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting here. Just on Monday for the college football championship game, VSiN did a betcast, which was really fascinating. I mean, it was just turn down the voice on the TV and put on VSiN and watch the lines move and watch how the bookmakers are moving the lines. What the over under. I mean, it was fascinating to see how that all works behind the counter, and that's something that I certainly NBC's looking at this. We're doing this now. I mean, the whole idea of betcasts, rights fees around this. Who knows where all this is all going to go? Who will be those Amazon, Googles, Facebooks, and maybe those guys are going to play in this world too. I think they're all thinking about this world, but I'd look at it, and see who are the next entrepreneurs? Who are the ones that are going to do those types of things? So one last question, and I'd love to open it up to the audience. But one of the things that you guys all know at 76 Capital, we work with a lot of athletes. One of my partners is Ryan Howard. We have our athlete venture group with DeMarco Murray and Ralph Sampson and Brian Westbrook, and we get their thoughts on what it's like to be a player first in the fantasy world and now in this regulated sports betting industry. What are some of your thoughts? Just from anyone can sort of jump in. Where do the players fit in all this, and how do they feel about what's happening right now when you talk to them in your travels?
I'm very concerned about the NCAA as gambling legalization happens. I think it's going to change the open practice forever. The day and age where you showed up and you say, hey, I'm an alum and I'm a friend of a booster, and let me inside the gates for the practice. You're going to see as the states roll out and it's legal in that state, the college teams are going to close off practices. Their compliance is going to give them the advice that there's going to be no random people who we don't know to watch this. So I think the NCAA is a real concern. I do think that your players and even your refs. And obviously there was the Tim Donaghy situation, but I think for the most part they're relatively protected by how much they make and the ideal that they don't want to lose their jobs. But in the NCAA, that's just totally not the case. But that just that's what has emboldened the gambling community to say, as they've always said, well, if it's legal, we'll see the action and we'll show you and tell you. And so that will be a deterrent, or at least we'll know when someone fumbles the ball on the two that we feel like that was a weird action based on the betting data that came in.
Bobby?
Yeah, I would agree that like the top leagues are probably protected and insulated. You saw guys like Mayweather was sponsored by Paddy Power when he fought McGregor. These guys are making a ton of money. There's probably little to no risk there. Obviously, NCAA and some of the lower leagues in the U.S., you're definitely going to have concerns around how the athletes participate in this. And then the other side of it is, and I'm not sure exactly, I'm not as educated around the Premier League and kind of some of the rules around it, but this opens up new advertising sponsorship opportunities for the athletes, like the McGregor example. I know Ibrahimovic is now sponsored by a betting company from overseas, and so a lot of these guys are able to kind of capitalize on it in other ways. So outside of the integrity piece, which clearly for the top sports, I don't think it's that big of an issue. It could be something new in their kind of marketing budget.
So at this point, I'd love to just open it up.
I just want to say one more thing.
Please.
I think it's ridiculous that, as the leagues open up, I think the athletes should be able to at least invest in sports gambling properties. I think it's a double standard, and I think it's incumbent upon the unions to push that. The unions have never, according to what I've seen, never kind of cared about athletes and their businesses. But I think that it should be parallel to what the leagues are doing, that the athletes should have the rights to at least invest in these things, and if they're going to take money, that the athletes can put their money in the products that are being built.
I think that's the sentiment from a lot of the players, both current and former players. Absolutely. So, are there any questions in the group for the panel or in the audience? Happy to take it up.
Hi, James Hines, Fanverse. We believe in fan data to create fan products. I'd like to echo what the gentleman just spoke about in regards to athletes being able to invest in fan products. My notion that a lot of athletes are investing in tech companies, becoming advisors, as well as learning how to engage in this opportunity to help a new opportunity and a new entrepreneur come to life. Do you, my understanding that betting as well as esports are becoming new opportunities for these athletes to actually become team owners, where they're not allowed in traditional. With the gentleman stuck here, if he had X number of millions, he possibly could own a team. But my understanding is if you could have billions, if these league owners don't allow you to own a team, you can't own a team, where esports allows for this opportunity. Any comments to that, where the new opportunity for tech is tech investment for athletes as well as esports? Any comments?
I mean, esports is obviously, some of the biggest esports franchises are now worth 200, 250 million. But it's easy to get into esports still. But I would say that now is the point where we finally reached esports, where it's not just a, hey, we'll take a shot at it. I think that's happened probably in the last 6 to 8 months with the valuation of the top esports teams. It's not let's take a shot at it money anymore. It's, so I think esports, because of the cost of entry, was something, and also because there wasn't any barrier to entry from the leagues. But I think we've kind of already reached that point of, you can't throw out money, because if you're going to have to throw out the money now, there better be a return. But again, I think esports presented an opportunity, and it might not, this is not an attack on esports, but it might not have been about esports itself. It was about that there was no barrier to entry, and it was relatively cheap, and it might happen next, where you couldn't put anything into a gambling product.
Any other questions?
Hi, Samir Gupta with Connect TV. We convert sports bars into sports books. I wanted to ask about the social element around gaming and gambling. Is this something that you think is going to drive people to stay at home more, or is it an opportunity to bring people together?
Yeah, I would say bringing people together. I would use an example. One of the books we work with overseas just launched group bets. So it's you and your friends can kind of put together a parlay. You think you want to bet on the Rams. I really like the Knicks tonight, and someone else likes the Seahawks. We all come together. We all place the same bet, which obviously as soon as that's placed, now we're all sharing the same experience, the highs and lows around the potential opportunity to win that bet. I think sharing that experience in person is even better. So I would say. You're definitely seeing, or from my perspective, you're seeing a lot of examples in products as it relates to the sports betting world that kind of push the agenda and foster people to be more social around it. And then again, some of the stuff I talked about earlier, social media is clearly where all the conversation is going down. You're likely going to see betting bleed into some of those feeds eventually, whether it's some of the big platforms here or some newer ones. And that can definitely be taken to in person and in bars and things like that.
I've seen two types of behavior. One is the community. At the Action Network, you can share your bets or see what your friends are betting once you enter it. And there's certainly dialogue there. But the other thing I've seen on social, we have contests where we put out a $1,000 prop contest for the national championship game. People download the app, it's free. And I noticed that people are not retweeting it in my Twitter feed. And so you'd think like, oh, that's not successful. It didn't do anything. And then we have 9,000 entries. The reason people aren't retweeting it is they don't want their friends to enter. So but they're entering, but they're hoping their friends don't see it. So I think there's two types of behavior there. But the behavior that is definitely pervasive is at the water cooler and shifting over to, I got into the sports business because people at the water cooler would lose if they said stupid shit there. Like, I think we should trade this guy for this guy, when like base year compensation didn't match up, or the owner's capacity to spend. And I think that was the interest in sports business reporting and why I was able to do it for so long. And now it's sports gambling. So I think the conversations are happening, but there's different types of behavior over, I want to see what this guy bets. Sometimes this guy bet, they don't want to really tell their friends. And certainly with opportunities like a prop contest or something like that, they think that their friends will compete against them and they won't win. So there's a lot of behaviors.
Ken?
The other side of that, too, that you may be alluding to, especially in your business, is venues, sports venues are trying to figure out how not to let bars and other places get ahead of them. What can you do in-game? What can you do at the venue that you can't do outside? So a lot of that's emerging, and you see it around the world, and that certainly as people are constructing new venues and renovating them, what they're looking at, that ongoing struggle of getting people to continue to come live gate for whatever it's worth, but to engage people more in the particular sport, and that's got to be a part of it, which people are figuring out ways to allow special gaming opportunities that don't exist outside the venue.
And I think that question there's a direct correlation to speed, right? When you talk about that question, because if you think about, the delay of the broadcast associated with, the data delay or the lack thereof, it changes the experience in stadium when you're actually dealing with data in real time versus having to sync that up with the broadcast. And I think what we're going to see is we're going to see people try to cut down that time frame between the traditional delay that we see on broadcast television, because it could potentially impact the experience. So, I think initially you're probably going to see some different experiences, whether it's, off-site versus on-site being in stadium. And of course, they're not going to want to, lose people coming to the game. So they're going to try to enhance that experience as much as possible and play it up. But, I think over time you're going to see that delay go away. And I think that's pretty important.
I think teams have already lost people. I think everyone's home, and gambling will keep them home.
You just put out a poll recently on Twitter?
Yeah, 73% of people said they'd rather watch a game at home than to watch their team in the audience. And the NFL hasn't shown any decline of attendance because they rig their own numbers. There's no audit. But I can tell you attendance is going down at least 2.5% a year.
Is that why GSW have, the $100 for people to trying to create a whole environment that you don't even get to see the game?
Right, exactly. Yeah, the Warriors. But yeah, they're trying to bring the couches to the Dolphins did it. They try to bring the couches to the stadium. Wi-Fi still isn't great enough unless you're a court-sider for tennis. you're not going to, it doesn't help betting. It makes it worse. Fantasy leagues have made people, they're fans of the NFL. They're fans of parking and tailgating. The steak at the tailgate, if you make a steak even, is not that good. It's not good enough to consider the driving and the traffic and everything else. So
The NFL calls Darren Dr. Death. So
yeah.
I don't know what.
Well, they can call me whatever, but I hope they accept me because it is the reality, and they quietly know it, whether they publicly talk about it or not. So I think the gambler is most comfortable at home, looking at their 5 or 6, the real gambler, their 5 or 6 terminals, like they're looking at Bloomberg or they're a stockbroker. That's where they're most comfortable. And to go to a game is not something, especially if you have significant money. But even if you have a couple bucks on the game, you feel most comfortable at home. So I think they've already lost. They've lost it.
Bobby?
I was just going to say, if anyone, arena leagues, et cetera, we were at the Golden Knights game last night with the NHL, and I would say that is the blueprint for getting people to come to games and enjoy it. It was definitely the most exciting, entertainment-based experience, and I think betting's obviously going to be roped into that very heavily over the next couple of seasons. I can't speak to whether or not that's going to change, Darren's poll of people staying at home.
Well, we can take maybe 2 more questions, but before I even do that, Davyeon, I just wanted to thank you for connecting us. I mean, David Stern's an investor in Shot Tracker. Really appreciate you having him be able to, inviting him to be here. Unfortunately, he was not able to be here. We want to send out, just positive thoughts to him and his family, and hopefully everyone is okay. And again, but just thank you for doing that for us.
Yeah, I got a call from him this morning, and it was his usual, David Stern self. So I think things are definitely in the up and up. So
That's
I
great.
would
That's great.
express that.
Hi, I'm Dave Dye with Gaming Today. This is for Bobby and for Davyeon. How was your data for your companies? How is it being used for bettors for in-play wagering? How now, and how do you project it might be used in the future for in-play wagering?
I'll start. I'm kind of on the tail end of it. So we ingest the data we're turning into odds making. Specifically, we have been kind of first to market with truly in-play player props odds making. So throughout the game, consistently being able to bet on how many points Steph will have at the end of the game. That, I think, has a very specific use case and kind of value add for the bettor in that no matter what the score of the game, the Warriors, I think, won by 18 points last night against the Knicks, or 25, whatever it was. But even in the fourth quarter, if you were only betting on his prop bet, you're still watching and you're still engaged. And so I think that's a very interesting and exciting thing that we're going to see continue to grow is player-focused or just generally more exotic odds-making in play that allows people to stay engaged regardless if it's in the beginning of the game, second quarter, fourth quarter, things of that nature, right down to, we're already, kind of demoing and modeling on how many more free throws will be missed overall in the next 5 minutes and things of that nature. So these bite-sized, not tethered to the final score, to the final outcome, opportunities as an odds maker obviously allows the product to engage the sports bettor that much more. But I'm sure you could speak to the actual data itself.
Yeah, so from our perspective, I would say that I can't talk really about the now because we're just in the initial stages of people understanding how to leverage the type of data we're providing because, as I said, it's really beyond the box score. But, I echo everything that Bobby's saying in regards to the in-play. I think that, with our type of data, there's going to be additional unique, bets that can be done that are, much different than the traditional, hey, how many three-point shots are going to be made, right? You're going to be able to go a little more deeper, a little more creative in regards to the scenarios. And I also think that it's going to give people like Bobby more data to, as you look at the data, that's one of the beautiful things about data, right? As you look at it, you're going to be able to find things that are interesting that you can surface to the end users that, even if we sat in a room, we may not be able to come up with. And I think that's one of the beauty. And I think that's definitely future as, current state right now is not being utilized.
One last question. There's one back there. We'll do 2.
All right. Hi, my name is Ray Cho. I'm a gaming professor at UNLV. For Darren and Kenneth specifically, you guys kind of touched on the culture of spectatorship and engagement. Do you see that changing? Is that a call for us as an industry to try to change the way that we as Americans engage in sports? And are we comfortable with gambling being a part of that?
Yeah,
We-
no, I think Darren threw the gauntlet down just right. That's what's incumbent upon the traditional sports industry. If you don't capture the energy that's going to be there going forward, there's going to continue. There was a decline before this Supreme Court moment. I mean, people were, I got this widescreen. I got, every beverage, everybody delivers. I don't have to go anywhere. And, depending on where I live, why do I not want to drive anywhere to do anything? So I think it's a tremendous challenge to figure out how do you capture people, and or in some ways you throw in the towel, and it's become less and less a part of the revenue that's important. You throw in the towel, and you see, the 100,000 seat venue. A couple of colleges have held on to that, but that's a thing of the past. So it is interesting to see where this is going to go. It's not going to be where it is now, and I think if the challenge is not accepted, that it can certainly be a huge decline. But it's not going to be. It will only be that that's just not what's part of sport anymore. You don't take your kid to that first baseball game. It's you show them how to bet on that game. I don't know if we can go that far, but those are the kinds of things that could evolve if the leagues don't catch on.
I would say if they don't adapt, that's at their own peril. It's just going to happen like it's going to happen. And I think the greatest risk is the millennials. They're the ones that are going to be thinking bet first, and they're also the ones that don't care about watching live sports. So if you don't give them the conversation that they're having, they're not going to come to you. They could possibly talk about the betting on a live game without watching the game, because what they're doing now is, as long as they get the highlight and send that to their friend's phone, and they were the first person to send the highlight, even though they didn't watch the highlight itself, that's good enough for them. That gets the dopamine going. So I think it's almost like you're going to go to where the conversation is happening, and if you don't provide the relevant conversation as the league, then you're in trouble. For so long, we've said that live sports, we've done ESPN's done these deals out to 2035, where, hey, it doesn't matter, people are going to watch live sports. And they have 77% of ESPN's programming, has been watched live. But the issue is that sometimes these guys, that doesn't tell the story of the people who choose not to watch it at all. And since that's the millennials, and those are the people who are most likely to think bet first, if the conversation is not where they see it being, they're going to go somewhere else. And the craziest part is that includes not watching the game itself, but following all the other parts of the game.
One last question.
Thanks, guys. I'm Dwayne Kuzan with 6S Alternatives. I think one of the elephants in the room about sports betting is the pricing, so the VIG, especially in live games and pregame. The negative 110 can kill bankrolls, and what do you do with your consumers once they go broke? So I wanted to get your guys' opinions on what do you think the future of the pricing of the industry will be. Will it move off the 110 and be negative 103 both sides, where you can have a lower strike rate and actually make a profit, or do you guys see it spreading out because of the taxes and things from state to state? Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's going to go both ways. So you're definitely going to have the taxes, state, federal, leagues, and they're making jokes about it on the last panel. So that's going to make it tough to be super price competitive. However, I think odds making is really allowing, and technology in general is allowing sportsbook operators to provide much sharper pricing. And we're seeing a little bit, or at least some of the clients that we work with, and some guys here in the U.S., seeing a little bit of a shift in that a much less risk-averse attitude, basically taking a position. So if you are very confident in your pricing and you're not getting it from some third party or just copying everyone else or the offshore books, you're going to have a much more convicted position about what your price is. And I think you can definitely see it get down to minus 104, minus 103, minus 102 on specific markets. Other markets, when it's not competitive, if you're the only sportsbook offering a certain market, there's really no incentive for you to provide anything other than at least minus 110 or upwards of that. So state by state, Jersey, it's still very fragmented. I'm not sure the statistics on how many apps one specific sports betting customer has, but if they only have one app, they're not really doing price shopping at this point in time. I think as it matures, price shopping will become something that sportsbook will have to kind of index towards.
I think that's the best part about the mobile app. I mean, DraftKings has, 60% of New Jersey because they were first, and the fact is that people are not really shopping the mobile person because the burden of actually having, if you want, you could have 10 apps on your phone, and you're really going to shop. There's a burden of taking off an app. It's why Caesars and William Hill have paid money for the Prudential Center. They have, this is the new version of, pardon my French, the lap dance, where they walk over and say, hey, you want to download our app? So that's really the important thing for them. So that's one. And the other thing is, you talk about what are you going to do when the gambler loses their money, and what does the customer look like? Well, what are you going to do when the states lose money, and when are they going to get out? I mean, you look at some of the hold percentages that they're required to tell us about, and some of them are scary. I mean, in some casinos, in some places, I saw 0.8 the other day, and I was like, what? Or like Johnny Avello mentioned, Pennsylvania, when all is said and done, we're talking about it's like a 50% tax to start. I mean, Pennsylvania could be the #1 leader by 2021, but not with that, they're not, and the $10 million fee and taking that percentage. So I'm interested to see, it's although guys like, Jimmy has said that the Nevada hasn't lost for 20 years. Be prepared. There are going to be states that are going to lose. Be prepared. There are going to be states like Delaware that might never get into mobile. So that's also going to be an interesting part of the landscape.
Well, it's a good way to end, but also that's sort of where we started. We were there for the first bet in Delaware, which was outside of Nevada, which was pretty interesting, as you were reporting at the time for ESPN, and we were there with VSiN and a bunch of our other guys, and just let's wrap it up. I'd love to ask two quick questions, and I did this on the last panel a little bit, was how many states, so each of you kind of give me your idea, how many states will have regulated sports betting by the end of this year, 2019, and also, who do you think is going to win the Super Bowl? Let's start with you, Darren. So you got 8 right now.
Right, 8 and then DC kind of. I think we'll have 13 by the end of 2019, 20 by the end of 2020, and 31 by the end of 2021. And I made it 31 just to make you pay attention because I was going to say 30. And then I think the Colts are going to win the Super Bowl.
Right, so the Colts odds right now to win the Super Bowl, 13-1. All right, Davyeon, what do you got?
I would say by the end of this year, I was going to say 12. I'm playing that's that Price is Right, going $1 below.
There you go.
We're writing this all down.
$1. Yeah. And so I was going to say 12. I was going to say 20 plus, the following year. And I definitely hope the Chiefs, don't
9-2.
choke.
9-2. All right. All right, Ken.
Like historical evidence has shown.
Yeah, nothing different on it. 13 to 30 is kind of the flow. Seems like it's something like that. Eagles.
There you go.
It's really happening. Yeah. Believe it.
Our data doesn't show that.
15-1, we'll take that.
Even though our CEO's an Eagles
last
fan.
year either.
I'll go 14, 20 plus in next year. I'll go with the Eagles as well. Like we're an analytics company. We're an analytics company, so it's a completely non-analytical pick and
Thank
just
you.
riding with it.
Unemotional investment. Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
Well, this has been great. Darren.
And you're going with the Eagles.
Of course, I'm going with the Eagles. We got 3
This is recorded, right?
What, the Giants? Where we go?
Get my money.
Darren, Davyeon, Ken.
I think the Giants are going to win the Super Bowl.
Thank you so much. Thank you to VSiN. Thank you to all the Must Burners. Thanks, Jess, Scott, Chad, John, the whole team, and Ken. Thanks for putting this together, and appreciate for all of you coming out. Take care.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you exit, we invite you to stop by the VSiN studio on your way out. Take a look at what's going on with VSiN on your way out. Thank you for attending, and who dat?